Okay, welcome everyone to this week's episode of Event Insights. I'm Christy with Safe Events Global. Joining me today, I have Matt Williams, also with Safe Events Global. Matt is the project director here with us. So if you've worked with us on anything before, you've probably worked with Matt. If you've worked on other festivals and different events around the UK, you've probably worked with Matt. He knows what he's doing. He's got plenty of experience, and he has used those years of experience to come up with his own show-stop procedures, which is what he's going to be talking to us about today. If you think of any questions during Matt's presentation, fire them in the chat here on the right, and I'll read them out to him afterwards. We can also just have a little chat with him afterwards at the end. And in the meantime, Matt, I'll hand it over to you.
Right, okay. You hear me all right?
Perfect.
Chrissy, that is right. We will try the technology again. So bear with me, everybody. That's still working, Chrissy.
Yeah, looks good so far. There we go.
All good?
Perfect.
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. You can possibly see me or not, but I can't see you. We are going to spend the next 45 minutes, hopefully, talking about show-stop procedures and the framing of show-stop procedures within the phases of emergency management. A lot of this is my personal view, my personal experience. It's one that's constantly evolving. It doesn't seem to stop. This started for me years ago on a show-stop briefing. Event director couldn't do it, was too busy. Asked me to do it, would normally be one of the show-stop card holders. Took the briefing, and then for that particular event director, then always did the briefings for them. Worked well with the system that we had going, but the show-stop procedure and the way it was briefed and how it was thought about has just been one of them things that I've always been interested in and have tried to do a lot of work on over the last couple of years. The current procedure we've got now, been working on that for a few years. I know me and one of the other managers on the site, Serena, a lot of you probably know Serena, we did a little bit of work on it a couple of years ago, and then it's just kept developing and developing. And then started to look at framing it within the phases, as we said, of emergency response and emergency management. And for me at that point, it just lifted it off the page. It grew legs and went off in all directions. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Also, the next phases as that I'm trying to get into, or that I'm trying to take this to now, is not the procedure. We're not going to learn anything new about the show-stop procedure. That's fairly standard. We'll get into that in the next couple of slides. But what I'm trying to look at now and develop off the back of the procedures now is how it's briefed. What does a show-stop briefing look like? How that information is done. So when you turn up and it's not a show-stop meeting of a couple of sheets of paper, hand the cards out and everybody goes on their way, it's putting it together in such a way that when you leave that briefing, you feel like you've learned something. You've learned something about your show. You feel like you've learned something about the procedure, and you're going away happier, knowing the background to the procedure, what you're likely to expect, and basically how we're not going to have to use the procedure, hopefully. So we're going to look at how we've got to the plan, what resources we have, what's in the background of it, because it's amazing when you think that this is the pinnacle of our emergency response, and in the vast majority of cases, it's thrown together by a load of freelancers who have come together over the previous couple of days. So, quite an incredible feat within our industry that we have this ability. We're going to spend the next 45 minutes possibly talking about something which, to be honest, I could bang on about for the next 3 days. So let's make a start. So, as I said, not going to learn anything new, particularly about the function, but what is the function of a show-stop? Why do we have one? So it's a control mechanism for us to bring a show to a stop, and we're either going to do that immediately because we've got an immediate threat to life, or it's going to be a controlled show stop. There's something coming down the line at us, adverse weather event, an off-site incident, and we're going to stop the show at the end of this song, the end of this set at 2:00 this afternoon. And it's that mechanism and the communication mechanism within that the procedure is. So, like I said, nothing new in that. Chances are it's either going to be temporary, even if it's quite as serious, crowd collapse, high density, a fire, or something structural. But even then, it's potentially might be temporary, and then we're gonna restart the show. Or whether it's immediate or controlled, this can be the first step in a full or partial evacuation of either the entire site or of a zone or a stage within the zone. So that is the function of a show stop. Hasn't changed. It's not going to change throughout this webinar this afternoon. We know what that is. For me, the way I've been looking at this, certainly recently, and looking at other studies in relation to emergency response and emergency management, is how it's framed and what additional work needs to go into it. So when we look at the procedure, then, for me, and again, this is my personal experience and the way I'm personally writing the plans, the show stop procedure and the document is the communication pathway of how we effectively and safely bring a show or an element of a show to a stop. So this diagram that sits within our show stop procedure, we have the show stop for whatever reason that might be. That goes into event control and your tactical team, and then one of these plans, and this list isn't exhaustive, one of these plans will then kick in, and it might be, it's a crowd safety issue, so it'll be elements of the crowd safety plan or the emergency response plan, medical response plan. So that's the point of what I'm trying to get across is these instances don't need to be detailed for me personally within the show stop procedure. The show stop procedure should just be, for me, the effective communication tool of how we bring a show to a stop, and not to go into detailing, how we might look at calming or emergency response or firefighting or dealing with adverse weather. Those should be contained within those separate plans. Then we're dealing with the incident in relation to whichever plan it is, and then once that has been resolved or not resolved, we're either going to return to normality and then we're going to evacuate. So there's a lot of discussion. I've seen a lot of show stop procedures over the years. Some will go into quite an element of detail about specific instances that are going to happen. Some will talk about show pauses, show calming. I personally am not a fan of the show pause terminology, mainly because as a show stop card holder, as a crowd or an event safety advisor on a show would be a show stop card holder, I would have the authority to walk onto a stage and stop a performance for a safety or crowd related issue. I wouldn't have the authority normally or ever to walk into event control and say, that's it, close the gates, everybody's going home, I'm stopping the entire show. Those types of show stop decisions are taken at a much higher level, and there's probably one or two people on the entire event site that have that level of authority. So even though I have a show stop card, every show stop that I've ever put in place and every show stop that I would probably activate personally would be a pause, because it would be an issue that we're going to resolve normally, and then we would look to restart. I just personally have an issue in relation to the terminology that we're going to have a show pause because we're likely to restart, but it's for quite a serious issue. So I personally have a bit of an issue with the language. So for me, it's a show stop, because whether you're stopping, pausing, whatever, you are bringing the performance to a halt. You are taking over the lights and the audio. You are dealing with an issue, whether it be a fight or a crowd collapse or a structural issue or a technical fault, and then you're going to restart again. So whether you're stopping for a limited period of time or you're stopping and not coming back on, the procedure, who's involved, what the mechanism is, for me that doesn't change. So who needs to be involved and when do they need to be involved? So there's the sort of standard list, and the expansion of this list came from discussions with one particular set of event people that for me, in relation to their roles and responsibilities defined within a show-stop procedure, had been overlooked. They were involved in the procedure, but would never really drilled into it in relation to the show-stop procedure as to what their roles and responsibilities might be, and having them recorded and agreed. So we would have those people who were brought in fairly late. So these are your stage managers, your crowd safety team, your security team. They're probably coming from show to show, so they're going to be involved. Your stage management and your the engineers, the house engineers. But then for me and the discussions that we're having, one of the areas that was overlooked in relation to a well-defined set of roles and responsibilities was the artist liaison team, who have more access to the artist and to the early stages in production of the show than the rest of us. So then we started looking at defining, in relation to the crowd safety and the prevention element, what roles and responsibilities, what assistance could we get written into our plan from our artist liaison team. Now, pre-event, that can be obviously communicating the show-stop procedure with the artist party, ensuring they understand who's going to initiate it, what the triggers are, what they should do when it is initiated. You're going to look at how are we relaying messages to them. Is it hand signal? Are we going in the rear monitors? And then get written confirmation that they agree with the procedure and with the discussions in relation to behaviour, political statements, flags, incitement, elements like that. We're going to get their written agreement in relation to behaviour. So your artist liaison team are going to be key people to be involved within your general show-stop procedure. They'll coordinate with your artist security, with the event and stage and security management, from the venue. Make sure everybody's aligned on those safety protocols. Look at potential risks, crowd surges, medical emergencies, adverse weather. What are the responses going to be? They can find out, is there any part of this show, that particular song, an encore, that we can expect significant changes within the audience? And then they can communicate that back with the event stakeholders. And do the artists have any in-house signals that we possibly need to be aware of that there's an issue? And then during that show stop, they're the ones who are going to be assisting the artist party to leave the stage if necessary, coordinating with security teams, assisting the artist maybe to provide calming messages to the audience if that's what we want them to do for safety. If we've removed them from the stage, they're the ones who are going to be passaging messages backwards and forwards, and then also they're going to manage their safe departure if the show's not going to start. So we've really looked at developing that artist liaison element within our show-stop procedure and getting as much information from them, which when we see this start, as we frame it within those phases of emergency management, they hit home within a couple of sections of that quite clearly. Within our procedures, we have flowcharts for key members of the show-stop procedure personnel. This one is one of the flowcharts. We'll go through a couple of these that we've got. This one is for our stage manager. the show stop's called either by them or by event control. They would approach the artist or the artist rep and request they stop the performance. If there's if it's stage related, then they're going to move them and the crew to safety. If it's audience related, then they'll wait for the instruction from the crowd safety team. We need the lights on. We need to make sure that if we've got appropriate messaging, whether that's screen messaging, whether that's audio messaging, that's relayed to the audience by the emergency microphone or the lead vocals. Keep the channel clear. If the issue is resolved, we're going to go for a restart, and within our restart procedure, that is always done through event control and then through the stage manager, and in agreement with other departments. If it was an electrical fault, then power will be involved. If it's a crowd issue, then crowd are going to be involved. Now, one of the things that we're looking at on one of the other shows that we're doing and some of the shows here is, can you honestly say that the last show you went to, when you was given a show stop card, you knew exactly where to go on the stage to deliver a show stop? I know within the procedures there are signals. We've got radio systems, we've got comms, and there are visual signals, in some cases crossed arms above the head. But who's watching for that? Who's watching for that signal? So what other methods do we have? Is it likely that somebody's going to have to get onto the stage or radio messaging? Now, can you hand on heart say you know exactly which desk to go to, which area to go to, who to speak to show the card to say stop? We're looking at identifying those areas now with route markings and a symbol. It won't be a show stop card, but a symbol that is done within the briefing. So if you're on a festival site and there's 10, 15, 20 stages and you aren't aware of getting around them all, but you happen to be in a position where you need to get onto that stage to deliver a show stop, then you know that you can get on, find that specific desk or that specific area because you're aware of what the symbol is, and then that person there will be able to initiate the show stop. This is one, we've got a couple of these. This is a flowchart that we would use for our crowd safety team. The show stop goes in, they'll communicate that show stop to the stage manager and event control, or the event operations centre, as we call them over here. And then as soon as possible, we're providing that update into event control, that we're pausing or evacuating, looking at, do we need any additional resources, keeping the radio channel clear, being prepared at all times to evacuate, following the instructions from event control, and then we're either going into a restart or we're getting ready for a phased evacuation out of the site. Now, this next one started to come up quite a lot after one particular incident, and that was the artist-led show stop. And we developed the flowchart in this so that we didn't want to be in positions where artists were initiating a show stop and then striking back up again. And while we weren't sure that the issue was being resolved, there'd been migration to or from the stage, and the crowd safety team, needed to let things settle down. Whatever the reason is, we wanted to make sure we had a procedure whereby if an artist initiated a show stop, then we were the ones who would then take over, and we were the ones that would restart, not the artist. So this flowchart is for artist-led show stops, where, same again, we would radio event control that we've got a show stop that has been led by the artist. We're going to put that additional updates in, get more information into the event control that we can. Again, any additional resources, keep the channel clear, but then stage management would take control of the audio and the house lights. They would follow the instructions from the event operations centre, and then if they're happy, it would be restarted by event control, or there'll be an evacuation, and then the stage manager would then hand the stage back to the performer once they were happy that everything had been resolved, and then they would then take over, and so the artist isn't stopping movement or migration or issues are happening within the crowd, and then they're restarting again before we've had a chance to sort them out. And then finally, we had our restart procedure. This is quite key, and we wanted to make sure that we had a specific procedure in relation to restarting the show, so that there was a procedure to be followed. So we've stopped, normality has been restored, we've informed event control that that we're ready to restart. We might include some special circumstances. We're restarting, but we're holding the lineup gates on stage level or whatever. Stage manager would liaise with the crowd management team, making sure that they're happy to restart, the channels clear, and they'll restart. And then it would update event control, monitoring, and then crucially, we're not operating that restart to get us back on until we're absolutely certain that we are also in a position potentially to stop again straight away. So everybody's back in position. The comms packages are on, the emergency messaging, whatever that is. If we're going to restart, we have to restart into a position where we are immediately available to stop again if required. So it's making sure all of those things are in place before we actually go for the restart. So, phases of emergency management. Show stop procedure. We've all seen show stop procedures. We've got, the function. We understand what the function is. And then for me, it was dropping it into the middle of an emergency management phases, this circular constant movement of preparedness within emergency management, and then identifying elements within the show stop procedure or elements that should precede it or that should come after, and categorizing them within these phases. And then at that point it started to grow out, and then we could see the background. Then you could see the way that this could be briefed, because it's an emergency plan, and it should be briefed like an emergency plan. So you should leave a show stop briefing feeling that you've learned something specific about your event and not just read through a plan. It should include, the procedure itself, immediate control, how it's going to be, who's on each stage manager, who are the key factors, radio comms, how the emergency messaging is put in place, where certain additional resources might be. What are the known issues that you might have coming up in relation to, weather events that are on the horizon, artists that are on the lineup. The list is endless. Are there elements within the show where we're going to expect on a particular day quite a lot of migration because of a certain act? So these are all things to include within the briefing, and not just here's a show stop briefing, immediate thing. We know what the radios are. Bob meets Sarah. Here's all your cards, and then everybody goes away. Which we've all been. Let's be honest, we've all been to show stop briefings that kind of follow that. You need to make it something from where people feel like they needed to be there. They've left with an absolute stack of valuable information across the show, and that they're glad they were there to receive it. It's also obviously a good opportunity for everybody to meet face to face. But that circular thing, that arrows where we're always moving, we're always checking. I think the busiest thing for me in relation to not getting to a point where you need to put a show stop in is be busy. Be busy. Be constantly busy, because it's a constant cycle of prevention. It never stops. You never stop looking in relation to finding ways of preventing one happening. checking the mitigation measures that you've got in place, updating them if need be. Are we seeing what we planned for? Is that what we're seeing? Are the mitigation measures working? Are we prepared? Is the plan changing? Does the preparation that we're doing for tomorrow, does that need to change? Do we need to be coming in earlier? Do we need more people? Do we need to open more gates? Do we need to close things down? The weather's a good example in relation to preparedness, isn't it? Because it's coming at us, we can forecast it, but there's nothing we can do about it. If it's going to be a significant adverse weather event, if it's coming, it's coming. So that's a good example of one of those areas in relation to preparation, because it might just be about preparing the ground because it's going to be wet, or preparing ballast because it's going to be windy. But there are other elements, certainly in relation to the weather. And then being responsive is responding, being responsive in a way that as things are coming up, you're responding to them and putting them right straight away, as opposed to your show-stop response, which we're going to get into. And if you're constantly responding to elements as they're coming up, constantly looking, constantly being busy, then hopefully what we're not going to have to do is respond in an emergency capacity. So, prevention. So when we talk about prevention in relation to our show-stop procedure, what are we talking about? We're looking at identifying foreseeable risks. And we'll do that by, we'll conduct risk assessments. We'll risk assess the event, the venue. We'll risk assess the audience and the artist and the effects that they have on each other. So we're risk assessing and identifying those foreseeable risks to the event. Prevention, we'll design and install all of the structural elements of the site, our stages, our crowd barriers. We'll design all that and to withstand the anticipated conditions that we're going to expect from our audience for this show. And because we've risk assessed the audience and the artist and looked at the demographic and the people that are coming, then that should feed into that design. So the two match. We will ensure that we're compliant with pre-agreed capacity limits. We're compliant with safety regulations. So those will feed into our prevention measures. We'll make sure that the access control systems are preventing unauthorised access, and the staff that we have are trained to recognise localised overcrowding. And we make sure that we've got clear protocols to monitor any external threats. So adverse weather, which we've talked about, off-site incidents, and those will be through partnerships with our stakeholders and the other elements of our SAG or our licensing, the local authority, the police, the ambulance service, and the health service. So that early intervention, early liaison from prevention point of view with those stakeholders. Now, some parts of that prevention phase are things like override cards, green cards, captain's cards, or just that individual empowerment of key staff. The ability to redeploy or override decisions in the interest of public safety, to prevent the escalation of things going wrong, because we're constantly looking at that prevention mentality, that constant monitoring. It's massively important. And early intervention, looking for those early triggers that stop us getting to the showstop. These preventative measures, these override cards, the green cards, and drilling into them that, yes, here's the card, and this is only relates to those two elements. Stop the show now, stop the show in a controlled way. This card, however, this green card, this restart card, this captain's card, or whatever, this is the card that says you have the ability to override, to prevent. And this card is more important than the showstop card, because we need you to be actively using this card. You need to be actively looking for situations whereby you can make an effect in relation to prevention. Mitigation. So this is how we're looking at minimising the impact of any potential emergencies. So we're going to make sure we've designed the site to optimise the crowd flow, and that's both normal and emergency situations. And we've got sufficient, clearly marked emergency routes, part of our mitigation phase. We're going to train our staff, and we're going to have trained staff who can recognise the signs of escalating threats. It's no good just being able to identify that we've just dropped off the edge of a cliff. We need staff who are trained, focused, empowered to be able to recognise the escalation of an issue and to respond and act appropriately. And we're going to empower them and support them to respond under their own initiative and to stop those situations deteriorating. We're going to establish partnerships with those external stakeholders that we were talking about earlier, the police and the Fire and Rescue Service, the Health Authority. Those partnerships are going to assist us provide, mitigating against having to get to a position where we're going to deliver a showstop. And then we're going to position staff at key points throughout the site, not just for the constant monitoring, assistance, support of our audience while they're in the site, but we're going to position them at key points throughout the site where we know we can rapidly deploy them into known hotspots that we've identified for the risk assessments. Areas where they can quickly move between phases of the event and between areas of the event, because we've got busy routes, busy stages. So making sure we've got those response elements situated appropriately around our venue, so that they can be thrown into whatever's coming up. Preparedness. We're going to have a showstop procedure. We're going to have a detailed and a coordinated, particularly, emergency response plan. We're going to build clear comms channels for our event personnel. We're going to also for our audience, so we can clearly communicate with our audience, with our wayfinding signage, with our emergency messaging, with our voice of God on stage. So all of those clear communication channels. Now, if possible, and somebody I work with quite regularly asks for this, like every time we're working together, or Stu, if you're out there, rehearsal. We need to try and find the time to rehearse this procedure. What does it look like? If I'm standing in the pit, can you even see me if I'm standing here with my arms crossed above me? No, you can't. Whereabouts do we go? Which desk are we going to? Is the voice of God work? Is it plugged in? Do we need to use the microphone? Can I send a message quickly to event control? Can the emergency or the pre-recorded audio messaging, how quickly can that go on? So rehearse the system so that when we do need it, we can quickly deploy it, because we've tested it and it works, and the emergency messaging is not coming up and it's upside down or it's in the wrong language. We are going to define the roles and responsibilities of our staff for normal and for emergency, because what might be one role during a normal, you might have a completely different role in an emergency. So we need to make sure that everybody's roles are defined for normal and for emergencies. And then we're going to ensure that our staff that have the authority to deliver a showstop have that means to identify themselves. And artists and artist management are fully briefed on the procedure. So we have a showstop card, or we have some way of identifying themselves. The standard way is, as we know, is with a showstop card. And we make sure that everybody has that ability to be able to identify themselves, and everybody understands what the procedure is. And then the next phase is our response. So we're going to have key staff, or staff in those key locations that are trained to recognise and respond to those developing emergency situations. And the risk assessment, our circulation risk assessment, everything should be focusing our attention into those areas that have higher risks, and those areas or activities or performances that are identified as a higher risk are staffed appropriately, mainly to reduce the response times. Because what we're trying to do is saying, with what's going on, on this stage with this headliner or with this artist, there is more of a chance of disorder, of crowd surfing, of a collapse of migration, of movement. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure we've got additional staff who are there in more locations. We're going to put spotters on the stage, and within front of house, for instance, cameras are going to be trained on this location. Additional supervision. And then we're also going to maintain and have an event control centre with responsibility for command and control, because coordination of all this is key to the response. What we also need to consider, that if a showstop goes in somewhere in relation to our response, it's not necessarily on our stage. This could be in another stage or another area of the site. What does that mean to me? Am I likely to see, is this going to be a temporary thing? Things are going to be back to normal pretty quick, or am I about to see a mass migration coming into my stage, my area, my zone? So the response to a showstop isn't just right, we've stopped, and then we're going to get on with this. It's right, we've stopped, we're going to get on with dealing with the emergency, but what impact is this having anywhere else? Are they starting to leave? So therefore we need to tell everybody back through event control, look, they're going and they're all heading towards stage 2 or stage 3 or main stage, whatever. Or we're about to evacuate. What, are we just going to throw the gates open? Or do we need to mobilise staff into those key areas? What else needs to happen? Are we pushing them out of the arena and over a road and into an assembly area? So what else needs to happen is that traffic management phase needs to go in, and those cars need to be stopped so that the road is clear before the gates are open. So it's not just, the response isn't just stop, deal with what's in front of me. It's stop, deal with what's in front of me, and what are the knock-on effects of what's coming next. What else do I need to do? Are we moving? Are we not moving? Are they moving? What additional resources do I need? So we might need to deploy staff first into those emergency egress routes and assembly points, because we're going to push people out rather than just opening the gates and letting people flood out. What additional resources do we need? Do we have any additional resources that we're considering within this? LED signs. Do the signage need to change? Right, we're going to push everybody away. We're going to stop people coming into stage left. So the LED signs that are on, crossing number 1, 2, and 3, they all now need to say no entry. So stop, respond, deal with that response, but what impact is the response having, and what else needs to happen down the tree? So those need to be, once you start looking at that, like I say, we start looking at this framework, then you start thinking, yes, our response, yes, deal with the issue, right, what else needs to happen? Well, then you start writing those into the other plans. So the person in that command and control function already knows, we've got to stop, this is moving, we've already got it written in the plan that what we're likely going to have to do is traffic management there, change these LEDs there, keep that artist on that stage there for another 10 minutes if we can, whatever that needs to be. And then that final phase of the emergency management structure is that recovery phase. We need to be operationally prepared, we said this earlier, to stop again immediately following a restart. So we shouldn't start and then put everything in place to be able to stop again. We should be fully capable of stopping again, restocking people back in position, everything back in place before we go for the restart. That should be our recovery phase. We should be debriefing, shouldn't we? Because we need to, if we do have to put this procedure into position or into play, then we need to know why. Why did we get, with all of the phases that we've gone through, with all of the prevention, with all of the preparedness, with all of the mitigation, with our response. Why did we get to a position where we had to put it in? What have we missed? If we've missed anything. So we need to debrief it. Review the incident, and not only review the incident, but what was our response? Did we get it right? What needs to change? Did it take too long? Were the comms channels too long? Then we need to record it. We need to document it. Document the incident, the actions taken, because we're going to properly need this for future reference, and to be able to come back to it at a later stage when, as I'm sure a lot of us sat out here now, you'll get that email 9 months after a show. Remember when we did that show stopping stage, whatever? Can you remember that? So if we've done a debrief and we've recorded it, that should all be part of that recovery phase. We should have systems in place to offer support to people affected by the show stop. This might have been a fairly horrendous incident that has brought this show stop about, for both the people that are affected by it and the people who are working there. So we need to be available and capable of providing support services for the attendees and our staff, where required, if that's required. And if we can, which is always our aim, we don't want to get into the show must go on and all of that, but it is always our aim. We've all been there in the trenches with this, where we think, are we ever going to be able to open, or we've just gone down and can we get started again? And we do. Again, going back to that, pardon me, going back to that, slide one, a group of freelancers in the most part who've all come together, who do the most incredible thing. You've been hit by weather, crowd issues, fires, whatever, water, whatever it may be. And these people, get you back on and safely, and get the public enjoying that event again. It's the swan, isn't it? Seamlessly gliding across while everything's going on underneath. So we aim to resume those performances where we can. So thank you very much. As I said, a whistle-stop tour of my personal experience in relation to show stops and the development of procedure in relation to show stop. It's still developing. The briefing element of this is the next thing on my list, but that's going to have to wait until the autumn. All of these plans can be very complex, but they don't have to be complicated, and they shouldn't be complicated. And always, we need to be trying to manoeuvre ourselves into a position of we don't have to do this. We don't want to have to deploy a show stop. So it's that constant cycle. If we take out the recovery element, but we should always be looking at preventing, and we should be looking at mitigation, and we should be preparing ourselves constantly. It's not just preparing ourselves and right, the gates are open, yes, we're prepared and away we go. And we should always be looking at responding up to having to respond in relation to a show stop. We should be responding with, this fence line isn't working and we're going to fix it. We should be responding with, there's not enough lighting in here that's causing us a problem, we're going to fix it. We need more doors, we're going to fix it. We need more medics, we're going to fix it. So we should always be responding, and hopefully not getting into a position where we're getting to the point where that response is a show stop and then we're having to get into recovery. But if we are, because we've framed our show stop procedure within the phases of emergency management and have considered and written plans and make sure we can speak to those plans, not within the show stop, as I said earlier, but we can speak to those plans, then what we've done is created the best opportunity that we've got of keeping all those people safe that we are there to protect every time they come onto our sites. So yeah, I'd say the best thing from me, be busy. Be busy, be constantly busy, always looking not to deploy it, but always looking for ways not to. And that's it from me. So thank you very much. I think we did get in about 45 minutes. That's not bad.
Yeah, you did really well.
There's a day at this, at least. If anybody's interested doing any, in doing some more. I'm sure there'll be more information coming out as we go down the line. So I will stop sharing my screen, or Chrissy will, and let's have a chat.
Matt, thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic. I know you're probably knackered after only arriving to Saudi this morning. Judging from the chat on the right here, all I've seen so far is that it's been super informative, really, really brilliant. The only question I've seen so far is someone, Rick Larkin, is asking if we could see some examples of the show-stop cards and maybe a briefing format for the safety meeting. Obviously, you might not have that on you right now, but if it was something that I could include it in an email to people afterwards.
A show-stop card, they'll be branded, but you're basically talking a card probably a bit smaller than a mobile telephone. It'll be red and it'll have show stop written on in white, like the fire signs, and it'll be hanging, with the person as a cred. Sometimes they're branded, sometimes they'll have your name on or a number, so that if somebody does, say, well, why have you stopped? Well, somebody with show stop card number 27 came on and stopped the show, and they can go, right, number 27, right, well, that was Matt Williams, yeah, so that was authorised. So yeah, a show stop card would be a red, would just be a red rectangle card, about the size of a mobile phone with the words show stop in red on, in white, or pick a colour. But the card itself, pardon me, would normally be red. I don't think we've got any. I think the ones that we'd have here would be branded anyway, so I wouldn't want to show those. So yeah, that would be a showstop card, yeah. Yeah, no, I think that explains it pretty well anyway. I haven't seen any other questions come in so far. Everyone, if you do have questions, fire them ahead. What I can say about that is that just goes to show you how much great information you had in your presentation, Matt. So fair play on that one. Well, I was practicing talking to people. Will have thought, hopefully people will have thought, if they saw me driving down the M1 to Heathrow yesterday, that I was on the phone rather than actually talking to myself in the car. And as I said to Mark last night when he said, the registrations were going, I said, well, I seem to have got it down to about 3.5 hours in the car yesterday. So I'm quite impressed. I've got watches and phones and stopwatches, and I've got a bit of a script with the timings on. And I was
really
then coming behind. So yeah, I'm surprised I managed to get it in 45 minutes on it.
I think Mark Breen might have lost a bet there too. We have something in here from Connor. I believe it's Connor McGurk. Hey, how are you doing? Connor goes, how many attendees at an event do you need the showstop procedure for? Most of the events I work on in Ireland don't have any, or if they do, they don't share it with security.
Don't know how long's a piece of string. Well, it's risk assessment, isn't it? You're going to risk assess. This is, again, think of your showstop procedure in the phases of emergency management, and the very first one is prevention, and the very first element of prevention is identifying risks and how to control them, foreseeable risks. So if you've identified within the risk assessment through artists, number of people coming or whatever, that there's a potential that you might need to stop the show, then you should have showstop cards in the showstop procedure. So that, again, that feeds nicely. Thank you, Connor. Almost like I'd fed him that one. That actually feeds nicely into why we should be considering this in the phases of emergency management, because by doing so, that answers that question, because the risk assessment says so, because we have done a risk assessment. So that's that would feed quite nicely into that, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Sorry, I was a bit distracted here with more questions coming in. We have one from Amal. He's asking, could you throw some light onto how this procedure integrates with the police protocols in case of a law and order situation?
Well, yeah, depends where you live, I suppose. The police are much more involved, in some countries and territories than others. In the UK, the police would be one of those stakeholders that we talked about. They would be in event control. You would be working, very closely with the police in the UK. They would be part of your silver team and your SAG. They would more often than not, they would be dealing with law and order on the site because there's 100,000 on some of these sites. There's 100, 120, 200,000 people. It's a small town, so they would, they have visible patrols, hearts and minds, all of that, making people feel comfortable and confident. If they wanted to overrule you and stop the show, then there would be a transfer of primacy, and the police would then take responsibility. Be quite rare. The police are pretty good at letting event people get on with running events. Where there's a very good working relationship between all of the events I work and the promoters of those events that I work and the police. So yeah, it certainly, to answer that question for the UK, it would be if the police the police can provide advice during the SAG or during the Silver meetings, and are quite capable of doing so, and they're in event control. But if they said we don't agree and we're going to do this in relation to stopping the show, then there would be a transfer of primacy, and they would take over, and that would be recorded that you are now in charge, and not only in charge, responsible.
Yeah, fair. Vlad has mentioned that it would be beneficial if something like this could be implemented into a online course. I know, Matt, you were saying that you could talk about this for days and days. We did actually mention before we went live here that you would also consider doing that, but it would just be about finding the time. So Vlad, leave that with us. Maybe it's something that we could work on. Abby Trainer, yeah, not to worry. I'll put up the links to everyone who couldn't register. And then Abby's also asking, how do we relate this to the world of online and hybrid events, or even real world actions impacting virtual world-based events? That was a bit of a mouthful. Sorry.
I need to read that myself. Which one was that one? How do we relate this to the world? Get me reading goggles. How do we relate this to the world of online and hybrid events, or even real world actions? I don't think it'd be needed. I mean, the idea of a show-stop procedure is for public safety. So public safety within a crowded event, either because of overcrowding or at the front of the stage for a dynamic act, or an issue within the event site. We need to stop the performance because there's a fire in a generator and we're going to move people out of the way. So in relation to hybrid or virtual events, that wouldn't count, because the whole point is that we're stopping the show for public safety and then potentially mobilizing them away or out or home. I just noticed that one just caught my eye from Will, that Silver meeting. In relation to emergency management in the UK, we run a gold, silver and bronze structure, or a strategic, tactical and operational structure. So the strategic directors would be the most senior people on your site. And then, so the silver meeting basically is all of the tactical function. So the people, the tactical commanders who were saying, this is how things are going to be run. This emergency has come off. This is what we're going to do. And then would pass that out to the bronzes, or to the operational function, and they would carry those orders out. So the silver meeting is that meeting where you would brief where the silver would brief other agency silvers and other elements of the SAG, because your silver is your tactical commander of your event.
One more here from Karina. She's asking, do you ever find there are cultural differences regarding what would or should constitute a show stop in other countries?
Yes. Some of that comes into the artist agreement element of it. So certainly in the Middle East, where I am now, for example, we've just arrived, within the artist agreement, for an international artist coming to this country, there are certain behaviours that we would want passed over to them. So things like nudity, and I don't mean full nudity on stage, but we wouldn't expect a male artist to be stripped to the waist. We wouldn't expect dancers to be in bikinis or budgie smugglers. We just wouldn't expect that, because it would be culturally insensitive within the region that we're in, and that would be communicated to the artist. Political statements, particularly now, at times that we're in now, flags, that type of thing. Those would be communicated to an artist, and there are things in relation in some regions in relation to speaking about or displaying icons in relation to sexuality. That again, that can be culturally sensitive to the areas that you're in, and you're in their home. So that could bring about a show stop because the artist has gone against the agreements, of that region or that territory. So yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Abby has just responded to what you had said about the online events. They're asking, it's when a local event safety issue such as fire, weather, defense action might affect participants in an online event and needs public notice, or when the live in-person portion of the event needs to stop, but there's also an online component or audience.
Well, if within any part of this there are a group of people for whom public safety needs to be protected, then you would have a show stop procedure. If it was identified within your risk assessment that you would need one. So again, consider your show stop procedure within the phases of emergency management, and the first one is prevention. So how do we prevent having to stop the show? And so we're looking at identifying areas of foreseeable risk. So if there is an area of foreseeable risk within that online, offline structure, then you would have a show stop procedure, and you would stop the show to protect. You wouldn't need to protect the people who are looking at the online portion of it because they're somewhere else, but you would need a show stop procedure potentially if it's identified in your risk assessment to protect the people at the live element of the performance.
Thank you very much, Matt. We do have one where Carlos is asking, what about when it's the artist starting a show stop? You did actually mention that in one of your slides.
Yeah, we went through the artist led. The thing with the artist led, yes, the artist will stop the show. We can try and brief them beforehand, look where across everything, make a signal rather than you stop, and we'll deal with it, because there are issues for stopping the show because the crowds can migrate. We can start to see disorder and unrest. So it would be better that the artist doesn't stop the show, and if it needs to stop, we'll stop. That's why we have the professionals and the trained people within it. But they do have a good vantage point. But the key is they don't restart. That's the key, and that's why we've written that flowchart within our procedure, is that the artist, I'm not saying, they're strumming along and then there's two people fighting and they go, oh, hang on a minute, hey, you two down there, you stop, and then they start again. It's when they go, stop, everybody stop, that's going on down there. Well, as soon as that's happened and everything stopped, then we need to take over. So our stage managers would be briefed that they're now in charge and not the artist, and it's down to them when it restarts. So that's the key part, really, that if it's a stop, the artist doesn't restart, we do.
Yeah, fair. We're just 2 minutes to 2 now, so we'll take 2 more quick questions before we let everyone go. Melissa's asking, what's the best way to deal with legal stakeholders that override a safety plan that you would consider to have a more damaging effect on a situation?
That goes back to the question we had earlier. If somebody has that authority, a legal stakeholder, the police, the local authority, environmental health in the UK, I'm talking about civil defence here, then if they are taking over, there is a transfer of primacy. So as it stands, we are in charge of this event, and we will run it the way we see fit. If an external stakeholder says, we don't like the way you're running the event, we are taking over, then there needs to be a documented process, because they are now in primacy and not the event. So we would document, okay, over to you, you're in charge, and you've said here that not only are you in charge, you are now responsible. And so that legal element that's how we would do that. That would be a transfer of primacy.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing a transfer of primacy, you need to be.
Yeah, 100%. And finally, Abdul Orman is wondering how many years of experience you have.
How many years experience do I have? Despite only looking in my very early 20s, thank you, I have 35 years experience of public safety. I was a firefighter for 30 years. I've been in event safety for 12 years, I think, or something. But in safety longer than that, and then I was a firefighter in public safety for 30 years. Hard to believe, I know, looking as young and youthful as I know that. It's the lighting. The lighting in here makes me look 55. I'm not really.
Matt, thank you so much. We've got Adam slipping in at the end just to say
thank you. Yeah, I noticed that. Adam, I'll be in touch in a minute because I have some information you're not going to like. Thank you, everybody.